Jazeera this week. It's called the Palestinian Laboratory. My sister told me about it because her son, Dan Davies, is the film director. And he's worked as a film director with Al Jazeera for quite a lot. Anyway, this film is amazing, and it's showing the the Israeli arms trade in detail. They went and did a lot of research on the Israeli arms trade, and they're very, very good at making weapons, drones. They specialise in, which can sort of shoot you from the air, and also surveillance equipment, cameras, and all this stuff. And these are all being trialled in Palestine. So the narrator of the film, chap called, I think he's called Adam Lowenstein, he goes around the Palestinian and Israeli landscape, and everywhere you look there are cameras and there are drones hovering, and people in Palestinian towns like Hebron, their lives are constantly surveilled. All that data then goes back to big data companies that collate it. They use data, facial recognition, and if they think you're a terrorist kind of guy, they take you out with the drones that are equipped with guns. And this is what they did in the Gaza war, using this high-tech equipment that Israel has basically pioneered. And it's a bit scary because the high-tech equipment that destroyed Gaza was an AI robotic thing called the Gospel, which targeted. So the terminology I learned from Dan's film is they have what's called the kill bank. I mean, what? A kill bank? This is the number of targets you've got of people you want to kill in any given conflict. And in the old system, when it was done more manually, with people looking at computer screens and figuring it out, you'd get maybe 200 in your kill bank for a given week. So the shooting rate, the death rate was quite low. They've now put all this through AI, and they put in all the data of facial recognition stuff, because Gaza is ringed with surveillance stuff, and they got a kill rate of in the hundreds, in the thousands, so that and that's why it was all destroyed, because something bleeped up on a camera somewhere that triggered an automatic attack on this building, because a Hamas fighter was last seen there 2 months ago, and it's in the data bank, so blow it up, even though he left 2 months ago. And it kills 20 people, his family, his cousin, his aunts, who have nothing to do with Hamas. That's what they've been doing, and I think that this film is really important. It's just come out. The second episode studies how Israel is exporting this technology. They are the 9th biggest arms dealer on the planet, a tiny little country, 9th biggest in the world, and they're exporting it to places with difficult borders. So America's buying their stuff for policing the Mexico border. They're putting Israeli cameras and stuff all along the border and elsewhere in these conflict zones. Okay, so I'm against that. It's the kind of weaponization of discourse. I'm for interfaith peace discussions between Israelis and Palestinians, not erecting borders with barbed wire that you can then target each other and kill each other. I'm against killing, period. But anyway, Dan Davies has produced a brilliantly important film that needs to be seen. It's on Al Jazeera. You can watch it. It's on YouTube now. So thank you, Dan. Yes, and we have to sort of rally our intellectual resources, as Pierre Leroux would say, to see through the kind of anti-social activities of these arms companies and the intelligence agencies. They're not intelligence, they're ignorance agencies. We need genuine intelligence agencies that can bring people together in peace. Otherwise, we're not going to realise our real potential as human beings on this planet, and that would be a waste, because it's a beautiful planet, and we've spent billions of years getting this far. Let's not destroy it now, but bring liberty, equality, and fraternity to its conclusion, as Pierre Leroux said in his masterly works. And one of his most important books, it was a 2,000-page, 2-volume work, I think, called L'Humanité, on humanity. And what is humanity for, he asks. Why are we here? You know, well, it's to fulfill this paradox of you know, bridging the tension between individualism and egotism and communitarianism. He actually prefers the word communionism to communism. He says in here, I don't really like the word communism, and I don't like what Marx has done to it. He's created a sort of robot system and it'll all end badly. He foresaw Stalin. He said, no, if we use the word communionism, that describes the kind of society we want, where we are in communion with each other based on trust, brotherhood and fraternity. You know, so there's a word to take away. Right, okay, let's finish. That's my little report back. It's been a busy week, okay. Any comments, feedback? Sudden silence here.
Okay.
Well, it's been busy, and this coming week is showing signs of being similar, but okay, let's move on then, and I'll let you choose which are the projects of the 99 Names of Peace, and which language do you want to choose?
Let's go by chance with number 50.
50?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So this is volume 2 of this epic work, which is 99 languages in the world and their words of peace. That's in the other volume, so you'll have to do another one. That starts at 53.
Aha. Let's do 53.
Are you sure? So the first one in the book. Okay, good. Okay, well, I really enjoyed doing this one, actually. You'll see why in a minute. I mean, I love them all. They're all amazing. But the language is Danish.
Danish?
Danish.
Okay.
Yeah. How do you say Danois?
Danois.
Danois, yeah.
Greenland?
So, yeah, the language is partly in Greenland. Yeah. Hands off, Trump. It's part of the European Union. So the word for peace is fred. It's a North Germanic language from the Indo-European language family. And I've travelled to Denmark several times. I love Copenhagen. I've been there. I attended the World Social Summit there back in the 90s. First big conference organised by the UN about world problems. Leaders from all over the world were there, heads of state. And Castro spoke. Fidel Castro came from Cuba. The leaders of Germany and France. Hillary Clinton came representing her husband, who was then president. And it was talking about social inequality. Social development was the theme. What is social development? So it's ending social inequality, ending racial and ethnic conflict, tension, ending unemployment, and similar things. You know, we can't, you see, development isn't just about economics, it's about society as a whole. It was a project proposed by Chile, Juan Somavia, who was a Chilean socialist, who was then in government when they got rid of the right-wing fascist lot, who were put in place by American capitalist imperialism. Somavia proposed this to the UN, let's have a summit for world social development. And every state was there. I was there as an NGO leader, watching them speak. I've still got the speeches here in this museum. It was visionary and amazing, and they also had a huge hangar for NGOs like me, and we all had stalls, and I collected all the bump. You know, there were like 500 groups from all over the planet who were activists in all this. So human rights activists like Amnesty and environmental activists. It was very inspiring. And I fell in love with Copenhagen. They'd organised that if you went and you registered through I think it must have been a website, but anyway, you could stay with a local family. So I was billeted with a local Danish woman who was a theatre actress, actually, highly intellectual. And when the conference was over, I stayed on a bit and I visited the museum in Copenhagen, which is amazing. I still remember going around. It's got amazing prehistoric stuff from Denmark, including a leather skirt, which dates from about 1000 BC, like a fashion model thing. Nowadays, it would look great on a fashion model person. It's like leather strips dangling from a belt. Designer quality, 1000 BC in Denmark. So they were into their high fashion even then. It's still in the museum if you want. Go to it. So anyway, I love Denmark, and I give the history of the language. It's divided into Old Danish, which is from 800 to 1525. The earliest form is runic Danish, when they use the runes. And then there's late Middle Danish and more modern and so on. And as a linguist, I go into all that. Of course, the Danes also settled in England, and Jorvik, city of York, was a Danish Viking settlement. And many words come from Old Danish, like knife, husband, egg. These are all Danish words that came into English. And my mother was from Yorkshire, so very probably was partly Danish in origin. Clough was her family name. They adopted the Latin alphabet and developed quite a high literature, especially after the Reformation in 1536. And Danish, the Bible was translated to Danish, and Danish intellectuals and grammarians, they became quite knowledgeable and learned people. And I give the history of all this, it's fascinating stuff. And then later on you had thinkers like Grundtvig, who I discovered. He was the founder of the folk high school movement, a Christian, who said we should study outside of conventional schools and universities. Let's have summer universities, let's call them folk high schools, where ordinary people can go and they've got a place to learn whatever they want, crafts, nowadays electronics, humanities, studying the runes or whatever. And these are dotted all around Scandinavia. I went to one in Denmark at Helsingborg, which is where Hamlet's play is set. Shakespeare's play, Hamlet, is set in this place. And there's a folk high school where I went to a conference of the European Peace Research Association. And they exist as a sort of alternative intellectual network across Denmark, and they were all invented by this amazing Christian visionary theologian called Grundtvig. We also have Hans Christian Andersen, obviously fairy tale genius, lovely chap, and Kierkegaard, one of the most important 19th century philosophers. And so, Denmark has contributed quite a lot to world thought. And we also have a great linguist called Jespersen, who was Danish, who inspired me in my kind of study of languages and etymology and stuff. And we can also mention Niels Bohr, who helped model the atom that we use. What is an atom? Well, Niels Bohr kind of gave us what the structure might be, and was instrumental in founding quantum theory. He fled after the German takeover of Denmark in World War II. He got out, and he was flown to Britain, and he helped the Manhattan Project. He met Einstein many times. They had long chats. So anyway, Denmark, interesting place. Now, what's the project that goes with Danish, right? Well, it has to be the new advancement of learning. Why? Well, I choose these projects very carefully, okay? So Francis Bacon, who's one of my favourite philosophers of the Renaissance period, was the greatest philosopher in Britain at the time. And he wrote a very important book, The Advancement of Learning, which he dedicated to King James I of England, who was married to a Danish wife. His wife, he loved her to bits, was from Denmark, and it was a big thing. A team of people had to go to Denmark. I think maybe Bacon went to escort her back to England to marry the king. And they had a long and happy marriage. And she was a patron of Shakespeare, because Shakespeare was a playwright at the court of James. And Bacon was a friend of hers. So Denmark was kind of in the air, which is why I think Shakespeare set Hamlet in Denmark, because he knew the Queen and it would impress the king, right? So anyway, the book, New Advancement of Learning, is a masterpiece, and if you haven't read it, read it. It's a survey of all known knowledge in the 1620s. What do we know about everything? Everything from meteorology to physics to chemistry to history to philosophy to ethics. All knowledge, and Bacon provides us on a map of knowledge, a bit like my periodic table. If you just pass that over.
Kind of encyclopedia.
It's a sort of encyclopedia, but he says what we don't know. Most encyclopedias tell you what we know. He says there are deficiencies in this, there are deficiencies in that. We don't know anything about this. Let's have a new name for that. So he's inventing at the forefront of knowledge gaps, things we don't know. And really he says, so we need a method to understand it all. And he coins scientific methodology. In this book, The Advancement of Learning, he basically says we have to have a new method of knowledge. Let's call it, and in Latin, the title of the book was De Augmentis Scientiarum, meaning the augmentation of science. And this became the founding tract of scientific method in the 1600s. And the Royal Society that was founded later in 1660 was based on Bacon's work in this book. And I give the whole explanation and details in this chapter. But what I say, Bacon says in the book, he says, I've purposely left out religious knowledge from this book because it's too controversial and it'll lead to all kinds of trouble. So I'm going to keep quiet about that. We're not ready yet to apply scientific method to religious knowledge. He says that in the book. Now I say 400 years later, now's time, right? Which is in a sense why I created this. This is my attempt to apply scientific methodology, a la Bacon, to religious and philosophical knowledge. So in this project, what I'm calling for is a new advancement of learning. The project is called the New Advancement of Learning. And I'm saying that instead of one person writing the sum total of all known knowledge, that would be quite difficult now because it's become so vast and so specialised. Look at the number of academic scientific journals in the world. Just to keep up with your field is difficult. How can you possibly master it all? So what I'm saying is let's have a collective editorial project to rewrite a new advancement of learning and ask the top thinkers and scientists around the world, A, what they know in every branch of medicine, maths, philosophy, humanities, religious studies, the whole lot, theology. What do you know? But also, most importantly, what don't you know? If you talk to a real expert about what they don't know, that's really interesting because you'll get truth and honesty about the frontiers of knowledge where we need to look in the future. So that's the project. And it could be done with a huge website. And I'd like to see the Royal Society get involved because that was the body that Bacon indirectly helped set up. And the equivalents in other countries, like the top scientific bodies of the world. Okay, it would be expensive. It would require some funding to get the websites and we'd need some staff to manage it all. Well, hey, it probably cost about one tank or one bomb that was used in Gaza, these £100,000 bomb busters. I mean, a couple of million would do it. So, and it would help save the world because, I mean, I can tell you straight off some of the deficiencies. We're not very good at ethics. We don't know much about how people can be made better. We know how people can be sociopaths and we're not very good at political science. We haven't yet devised constitutional mechanisms to safeguard from takeovers by sociopaths who've got severe narcissist problems. We've got problems with democratic political theory because we don't know how, when fascist groups that mean ill, want to take over democracy, we can see how easy it is if you've got the money. So those are gaps in our knowledge. We don't yet know, as political scientists or philosophers of politics, how to guard against all that. And then in peace studies, well, don't get me started. There are huge gaps in our knowledge. We don't know, how to guard against people weaponising propaganda when they want to launch wars on their neighbours, or how to prevent people demonising the other because they're a different religion, etc. So it would be really interesting now to redo the advancement of learning. And Bacon, gets some flack from people around the world who grumble at science and say, oh, we don't like him. But if you actually read what he said, he was quite a genius. And I don't think we can uninvent science. I think we have to take it further and perfect it and look into the areas that he left out, like religious, ethical, moral questions. And I think it's now or never, really. It's like we're on the speeding train, we're going to the abyss, like we've got to find where the emergency stop brake is. That to me is where we're at here. And I'm sure Bacon would agree. A little footnote here, when I lived in Islington, where my daughters were when I was little, they were little, had a house in Canonbury. It's a particular part of Islington. And I discovered not far from there is a place called Canonbury Tower, which was a medieval part of an old monastery that by Jacobean times had become a stately home. And he rented Canonbury Tower from whoever. It was actually the Lord Mayor of London at the time, who leased it to Bacon for about 10 or 20 years. And it said that he also organised like Masonic type Rosicrucian rituals there. And my friend Peter Dawkins used to lead tours around showing, this is where Bacon founded Freemasonry. I don't agree with Peter that he uniquely founded Freemasonry, because it had come from Scotland with James, and it was already here in France and the medieval Masons. But I think Bacon was certainly a key figure in it. And Canonbury Tower was the place where it was all happening. And it was round the corner from our house. And my daughters used to go to a ballet school opposite it when they were little. So, yes, I have some links to Bacon, and used to go to Peter Dawkins' Francis Bacon Research Trust meetings, which were fascinating. So, yes, keep it up, Peter. And let's do this new advancement of learning, please. It's got to be done. As I say, or we are not going to save this planet. Right, there we are. Any questions?
No, thank you very much. It's very interesting.
It is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Did you learn about Bacon in university or school in France?
No, of course the name is famous, but I have no memory about
the details.
Yeah.
But French science is based on this too, It's like, it was a joint thing, and Bacon, by the way, spent a lot of time in France. He was here for periods of time, because all British intellectuals wanted to spend time in France. For them, it was their other home. He spoke fluent French and Latin, and he loved France, This is why I'm so totally against Brexit, the severing of...
There is some kind of French character of universalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And he probably, being in Paris, where he lived for a while, and also in the Loire, this is where he absorbed some of these ideas. He was not a small thinker, thank God. And he was also a friend of Shakespeare, just to add to this. Yeah. He was part of the same team, because they found a text in Bacon's hand with some classic phrases and turns of phrase that appear in Shakespeare's plays. And I'm convinced that Shakespeare and Bacon used to discuss the plays, and because he was a historian, he wrote history. I'm sure that Shakespeare consulted him for some of the plots, and we don't know the full story of this yet, but it would have been fascinating to be alive then. Okay, that's that. That's very exciting. Thank you. Let's go on to look at the periodic table next, because since we're trying to be scientific about religions, let's show it in action here. I'm going to choose randomly. Okay. Oh, right. Jolly good. Just do the wandering finger on in the air.
Yeah, I take philosophy education and to follow on your project.
Oh, right. Yes, yes.
Philosophy education and academicism.
Okay, now 167.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we'll come to that in a minute. We'll start with my one, which was number 84, which is a school of Islam or tradition within Islam called philosophical Islam. That's very relevant. What I discovered through my teaching at the Muslim College and studying Islam over many years, the only other thinkers that had done a Bacon and done this huge survey of knowledge were in Islam. Islamic philosophers did this as well because they were fascinated by knowledge and how it all interconnects. And there's this tradition in Islam of really, really amazing thinkers who, you see, they saw all knowledge as divine. That's their starting point. It all comes from God. But it comes in different ways at different times of history through different minds that can access different parts of it. So some are good at maths. Some invent algebra, like they did in Baghdad. Some invent cartography and geography, like Al-Idrisi in Sicily, who made the most complicated map of the world in his day. So Islam has always been a project of knowledge advancement. The Islam bit is about spiritual submission and humility. So no one intellectual, however great, can ever master everything. We're all just like servants of the Absolute, which is the source of all knowledge in Islamic thought. And so the Quran is a guide to how we can tune in to that level of subtlety. And so these great Islamic philosophers have been on this for the last, since 600 AD, when the Quran first started arriving. So we can name some of them who are their famous people. Al-Kindi, who was one of the first great philosophers in Islam. Al-Farabi. And Ibn Sina, who was from, or we call him Avicenna in Latin, from Persia. A lot of them came from Persia, in fact, which is why I can't buy into this anti-Persian nonsense that's going on. These people are profound thinkers. And they were translating Aristotle into Arabic in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. And they had access to Aristotle's works and Plato's in Arabic. Like when Britain was, before Britain ever got hold of them, let's say, let's be polite. And another great thinker in this tradition is Ibn Rushd in Cordoba, in the other side of the Islamic world, in Andalusia, which I've been to several times in Cordoba for conferences about this period of the golden age of Islamic philosophy. Ibn Rushd was the commentator on that. He did these commentaries on Aristotle, which is great. It means I don't have to do them, right? He went into it with a fine-tooth comb. Yeah.
Around what time? What is
sort of
golden age?
Ibn Rushd was about 1100s.
Thank you.
And I haven't got the exact dates with me, but about the 1100s. And Cordoba at that time was the most important intellectual centre in Europe. They were translating these classics from Greece, but also from as far as India, because the Islamic world had got into India by then. And it was Hindu mathematicians that were brought their knowledge to Baghdad that led to the invention of algebra by some of the great Islamic mathematicians of the day inventing algebra, and that had got to Cordoba by then. So some English mathematicians, like Adelard of Bath is a famous one. He went to Andalusia to study with these guys because that was like the cutting edge knowledge of the day. That was like, I call it like the California of the 11th century. It was the Silicon Valley. And also Islamic numerals came through there. So the numbering system we use, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the letter shapes, that was from Cordoba and Andalusia, because they were Arabic numerals. And it was a pope actually said, finally, okay guys, let's use those numerals from now on. And he made it compulsory, because before then we were using Latin numerals, which are much more complicated to do sums with. So Ibn Rushd was amazing, and I've been to Cordoba and sat in his shadow, so to speak. Another intellectual of repute in philosophical Islam is Al-Ghazali, who was a profound thinker as well. Mullah Sadra, who was Persian, he was like the Sartre of the Islamic world, because he wrote huge treatises on being as God's. Okay, what's the energy behind being? Where does being come from? It comes from ultimately God, but how? Why? Why does God want being to exist? What does God get out of it? Well, Mullah Sadra explained it all. And in the Quran it says, God creates the world by speaking it into being. Well, why? Why bother? Well, ultimately, it's for joy. It's for goodness, for love. It's an effulgence of the divine glory that creates being in all its manifestations and forms, from the tiniest insect to the greatest galaxy. This is all God's effulgence creating that being. And the duty of the scientist or philosopher is to study the details. How incredible. Like this film I just watched about the oak tree, made in France at a site not far from here, studies the life of an oak tree and its creatures over a year. And the details of the insect lives, the little mice that live in the basement, the owls that fly about, the boar that come, all of them, to the mind of these Islamic savants, are created by the effulgence of the divine nature. And in fact, Islam contributed enormously to the evolution of zoology and the study of plants, because they thought herbs likewise provide medicine. They're also sacred, and therefore they got really into studying them, and also helped develop chemistry by analysing what things are made of. Islamic thinkers developed, what we call chemistry, which came from Egypt, al-Chem. Another great thinker of this school is Jafar al-Sadiq, who was an imam. He's revered by both the Sunni and the Shia sects of Islam. And these philosophers, they straddle the boundary of Shia and Sunni, thank God, because it's like Protestant and Christian. A true Christian philosopher is both Christian, is both Protestant and Catholic, not either or. There are elements of wisdom in all those traditions. Same with Shias and Sunni. And Jafar Sadiq is honoured in both. And he left some amazing writings. Ibn Khaldun was another, who was an inventor of sociology. The great historian Toynbee loved Ibn Khaldun. He said he was the greatest thinker in Islam. I'm not sure he was the only great thinker. There are so many. Then we've got Muhammad Iqbal in the 19th, early 20th century, a philosopher from what is now Pakistan, whose grave place is a holy place of pilgrimage, who was a poet as well. He said you can only put real philosophy of depth into poetry. But he did his PhD at the University of Germany in Munich, and he looked at the philosophical traditions of Persian Islam for his thesis. And then he wrote a later book called On the Reconstruction of Islamic Philosophy. He said that Islamic philosophy has to learn Western thought, study Hegel, study Nietzsche, study Bacon actually, and then, update its work. That's the work I'm trying to do. I'd like to see all